Ballad of the Nameless Traveler by Tomek Piorkowski, a fantasy epic in rhyme. Text copyright Tomek Piorkowski 2012. Part 3. Once, in the far-off forests of an eastern place, there roamed those wild members of the werewolf race. To the south of them was the great and rich nation of Shan, into which they from now and then an invasion would plan. For the Shan had silk and gold and tools and things, those goods that sedentary settlement brings, that nomads like the wolves were not used to making. So the werewolves went south, where those things were for taking. Tribute they demanded, and tribute they extracted. With prizes they went home after their force was enacted. But a new son of heaven became emperor of Shan, and his dream was to make northern wolf fear southern man, the greatest army ever sent by a settled nation. Went to put the werewolves back into their proper station. It was not a war that was easy for either side. The fighting was brutal, and many good warriors died. In this war there was much misery in its story, so of this war let me not spin epic tales of glory. Let it suffice to say, it could have gone either way, but that in the end the Shan were badly defeated, and what was left of them back southwards retreated. However, the fierce werewolves followed their track, for the werewolves had resolved to counterattack. Not long afterwards, at the siege of Peiping, defeat to the emperor the werewolves did bring, and there was nothing the Shan could do to deter the victory that was grasped by werewolf King Fenrir. The emperor then ended his life with his own blade. His abandoned generals then surrender pacts made, and each gave up his sword to the conquering lord. Then Fenrir's fiercest general, Lobo, had this to say of what do with the foe. My king, do you wish to see even more of these man-monkeys groveling on the floor? They invaded our lands and insulted our pride. Let us wipe out their entire nation in genocide. And when the last human head rolls on land scoured and dead, then we can return back to our wandering ways, as nomads in the forest, as in the olden days. But King Fenrir could not be swayed to have such a decision made with a growl and a scowl. This is what the great werewolf King Fenrir then said: "If you dare touch even a hair on a human head, I shall make an end of your life, for I declare an end to this strife. The war is over, now I shall be king of wolves and men, and I shall rule from the Shan palace, it shall be my den." King Fenrir ruled with a wise and restrained hand, and peace of a sort settled upon the land. The humans had to accept that the werewolf race now would rule over them, at least for a space. But after a while trouble began to brew, and Mai Dun, the governor prince of Shang-Fu, was encouraged to rebel. So his advisors would tell, "You who carry the famous rune sword, handed down from Shang-Fu lord to lord, how much longer shall we live under a foreign horde? For how long shall your courage be locked away and stored? Rise up and lead us and let us rebel. We shall show the wolves the meaning of hell." King Fenrir was in bed old and ill. He sent his daughter to work his will. Sigrimu her father's rule would enforce against Mai Dun's rebellious course. When in human form her ears were white, furry, and long, her hair was snowy white, her body lithe and strong. She was reckoned by both werewolves and men as the most beautiful woman in their ken. But her heart was fierce, and her voice was commanding. Those under her would not dare an argument starting. So it was, she led her army, vowing to make those rue, those who dared to turn rebel the province of Shang-Fu. But would you believe this war had barely begun to start, when the first to fall in this war was in fact Mai Dun's heart. For no sooner did he see his opponent's face, than his mind and soul all tumbled out of place. Of war and revolt he no longer could care, entranced as he was by a beauty so fair. Before the start of a single battle melee, already Mai Dun had surrendered upon his knee, and his army dissolved in dismay as their leader was taken away. Sigrimu, amused, locked away her foe in a cell that was below her window. Mai Dun, undeterred at this fate, sang poetry through the dungeon grate. He sang odes from the Shan book of songs. He sang of lovers' rights and lovers' wrongs. He sang of flowers blooming under a springtime noon. He sang of sorrows, of a lover lost in a lagoon, of nighttime trysts under a faithful moon, of useless rulers who could not leave too soon. And by her window sat Sigrimue, the princess of Shan, every night listening to the songs of a confined man. At last he was brought up to her room to sing, escorted from his cell in the dungeon wing. Every night he sang his songs, hoping her heart to win, while gently playing melodies on an ancient gudgeon. Sigrimue listened with an attentive wolfish ear, and every night their seats were put a little more near. She grew more and more charmed at each and every word. That sank into her heart, and made her soul more stirred. She drank him in with her eye, as he was lost in song. To her he could never into the night play too long. But she grew irritable, for it seemed a conquered man was conquering Sigrimue, the wolf princess of Shan. Then one night Sigrimue brought out Maidune's sword, and toyed with it while listening to Shang-Fu's lord, when suddenly she leapt forward as he played, and pressed against his neck his own naked blade. "Your intentions," she said, "are far too clear to miss. If you will forfeit your life, I will grant you a kiss. And if that is too much of a price for you to pay, then forever in the dungeon I shall lock you away, and never to your music, miserable and plain, will I ever lend my condescending ear again." And then Maidune, with no fear in his eye, to Sigrimue gave the following reply: "Gladly I will take that kiss for the mere price of my head, for if I can never have you, I may as well be dead." He pulled her close. She hesitated as never before. She found herself dropping Maidune's sword upon the floor. And I suppose from that we can the following infer. She surrendered to the man who had surrendered to her, so it was that Maidune became Sigrimue's mate. Alas, it was the beginning of a star-crossed fate. King Fenrir felt his end coming near. He spoke in his voice brave and clear. "With all good and great things in life have I been blessed. I am satisfied, and now go to my final rest." These were the final words of King Fenrir, ruler of wolves and men, hero, conqueror. Then Sigrimue was crowned as Empress of Shan, and Maidune was declared her consort and man. But harsh whispers spread like fire through spiteful hearts in the empire. To some men, the traitor Maidune deserved a flog for being with someone they considered a dog. And some wolves grumbled that they had to see their queen mating with a clean-shaven monkey. Few were more upset than the fierce werewolf Lobo, that general who was a terror to any foe. He had always refused to shapeshift to human form, always keeping his werewolf shape as the norm. He looked in disgust at wolves, supposed to be his ilk, that stuck to the human shape and wore clothes of silk, all because they were rulers now of a civilized land, practicing politics, speaking words as sleights of hand. And Lobo would drink, fight, and growl, and miss the sound of the distant howl. He would spit at the brick-laid streets of Peiping, and miss the wind that through the forest trees would sing. Poor he felt in the palace rooms, he felt keenly the lack of the freedom of roaming, of the hunt with his pack. Shang-Fu was still hard to control, and rebel voices rose. Once again they wanted the empire to oppose. Why should we in our land be treated like hogs? Woe to the Shan if they would be ruled by dogs. And though most people were too busy to hear, yet to some people those words to war would steer. When Sigrimue heard of these reports, she called a council, and asked if the army should all such dissent go quell. Maidune spoke, "I am the governor of Shang-Fu still. It would hurt my soul to see my people done ill. Let me go back and talk to them. I'm sure that I this torrent can stem." And though she dearly would rather have had him stay, the Empress at last allowed Maidune to have his way. Maidune then set off with an escort, in order matters in Shang-Fu to sort. Lobo was disgusted. From vicious words he would not shirk. "I can't believe a man has gone to do a werewolf's work." King Fenrir must be heaving in his unrestful grave. "Why must I bow to a man as if I were the slave? Our queen plays with monkeys. It grows hard to think. I may as well drown myself in another drink." His comrade and Lieutenant Skull poured wine into his cup. "Now, General, why do you whimper and snarl like a pup? It is not like my old General Lobo to drown himself in sadness and sorrow. Why sit here, seething in dissatisfaction, when the chance is here to finally take action? Let us capture this Maidune, then use him to bargain. Sigrimue for her lover will be forced to give in. Lobo looked at Skoll with narrowed eye, and then to Skoll gave this reply, You stink of fox's blood with your cunning. Who knows what schemes are through your head running? But I would rather stink like you, than let myself the passing days rue. Tell my troops to secretly prepare to leave. Let them learn. We are going to have an ambush for Maidune's return. Now on the fringes of the empire was a village going through something dire. A mixed group of brigands was roaming the land, taking whatever they could get into their hand. Of both werewolves and men consisted this bandit gang. In 5 provinces was their leader sentenced to hang. Warg was his name, a werewolf so fearful that many referred to him as the Dreadful. The villagers of Genli had been living contentedly in what had been the peaceful province of Kwangyu, but with trouble brewing in neighboring Shangfu, the army had been rallied away from the frontier. And now villains in their place began to appear. It was with fear that the people of Genli learnt. Some neighboring villages had already been burnt. To discuss any plans on how better than that to fare, an emergency meeting was called in the village square. Some said to run, some said to hide. Some thought that maybe they could abide. The village chief Lu scratched his balding head, wondering what to do with all they said. If only the gods could help us, he thought, as the most wise path he clumsily sought. It was his daughter, Lien, who first heard a whistle then, a happy, carefree melody, that wafted rather merrily. The 10-year-old ran through the crowd. What could that be? She thought out loud. Riding through the village on a horse that knew not slack was a handsome stranger armed with sword and dressed in black. The horse's eyes were red and flashing with dread, but the stranger's face was kind and warm, and had a beautiful and handsome form. And for some reason little Lien then asked, Stranger, we in this village are sorely tasked. We don't know what to do, so let me ask you. A gang of bandits threatens to attack. What should we do, stranger in black? Little girl, to keep your village in safety, then you must listen carefully to me. There is a certain someone who yearns myself to find. He is always chasing me and is never far behind. Tonight, just after the sun has set down, this individual shall pass through your town. Do not dare go to bed, little one, until the following task is done. Tonight, when Dundee passes through, grab him with both hands, hold him tight to you. Beg and plead and entreat him to stay, and he for your village shall win the day. Then the Nameless one rode on, and soon enough was gone. He was not even noticed by the rest of the crowd, so absorbed were they in their own babblings loud. But little Lien watched as he departed, dearly holding on to the words he had imparted. Meanwhile, after much diplomatic maneuvering, Maidune was to the capital returning. Weak and weary was he of being alert like a hawk, navigating the stormy skies of political talk. He longed to return to his lover Sigrimue, with thoughts that flecked his mind like the morning dew. On the winding path he pushed himself and his train, through good and miserable weather, through sun and rain. What mattered this world, with its fill of pleasure and pain? All he cared for now was to see his Sigrimue again. Skoll, always planning some sort of trickery, used what he knew of magic wizardry, and with his mystical eye he Maidune's path did scry. And his general Lobo then laid down his plan. His wolves then lay in wait to ambush the man. After a long day's travel, Maidune and his men made camp. The cook prepared the meal, while one lighted every lamp. Another one played the flute, while another would sing, and the sergeant arranged guards in a defensive ring. The Duke of Shangfu sat amongst them, most unlike a lord, laughing with them at their delights, while polishing his sword. Surely they felt that this would be another peaceful night, with little to bother them until the next morning bright. But there was a wolf watching from the deepest shadows. Silently he crept away, undetected by his foes. This wolf returned to the General Lobo, and growled in his ear all that he did know. Lobo then snarled in the happiest way and cried, Come, werewolves, on to the fray. Once more we go hunting for men, that the soil may sing with blood again. Maidune was asleep when he awoke to a howl. He right away suspected that something had gone foul. He unsheathed his rune sword, and stepping without slack, ran out of his tent into the midst of an attack. His men were screaming, falling left and right. Against werewolves were they suddenly in fight. Maidun swept through the battle, hewing his way. His magnificent rune sword came into play, and it seemed that his sword would carry the day. As every wolf before him Maidun did slay. Then came a howl, bellowing through the night, so mighty and loud that it did halt the fight. Swords and claws halted suddenly in mid-air, and towards that howl everyone did stare. Enter Lobo, tall, strong, magnificent and proud, with a presence that would hush the angriest crowd. He walked slowly, fearsomely, towering above all, with deliberate step, till his gaze on Maidun did fall. "By all that I am," Lobo cried, "by all that I will, your disgusting monkey face urges me to kill." The Lord shook his sword of the rune, and thus to Lobo replied, "Maidun, treasonous wretch, do not in front of me mule, let's spare our men, fight me in a duel. And when finally you beg me for mercy to show, I'll drag you back home on a leash, you bastard Lobo." Then General Lobo laughed with mirth. "At least in courage you show some worth. Very well, let this battle halt, I'll face you one-on-one. Prepare yourself, fool, I will wait until you are done." The two sides separated uneasily. Wolf and man faced each other warily. Maidun called for his servant to put on his armor, and while it was strapped upon him he hardened his ardor. When he stepped forward, his armor glinting in the torchlight, he truly looked like a lord, like a magnificent knight. But even Maidun felt small and looked on in awe at Lobo, who stood tall, naked, armed only with claw. But Maidun refused to feel afraid, and forward he went, flashing his blade. Down like a hammer would go Lobo's fist, which Maidun's shield would stoutly resist. In return the rune sword through the air was thrust, which Lobo dodged or parried, but only just. 'Twas in truth a magnificent fight, between two beings great in might. The duel dragged on, with neither having advantage, till Maidun's limbs wearied from this fight most savage. Despite his soul's commanding, his limits began to prove that legs can't run forever and arms can struggle to move. With dismay he saw that Lobo was not tired. Blow after blow from his arms the werewolf fired. It felt like he could barely hold his shield in his hand. It felt like he could barely order his legs to stand. Though his spirit was brave, his body proved too weak, and clearly his chances for victory were now bleak. Till finally came an instance where Maidun then knew, while he lived, he would never again see his Sigrimu. A mighty strike was then thrown by the fearsome Lobo. Maidun's legs buckled, and he sank beneath the blow. The man tried with a sword swing to make a last stand, but the werewolf battered his sword straight out of his hand. Helpless and exhausted, Maidun's body trembled, but his eyes were fierce and with courage assembled. Though he had nothing now with which himself he could defend, yet he refused to feel fear, merely for meeting his end. Then Lobo, with a grin upon his jaws, upon Maidun firmly set down his claws, saying, "How I yearned for you to be dead, now I am going to rip off your head." "My general," cried Skoll, "what of our plan? As hostage, remember the value of this man." And Skoll leapt forward, trying to intercede, to prevent his general from doing the deed. "Remember this man is a lever of power. With it we can make the empire cower. If we do things right, then all Shan's cities and towers, all her wide lands and waters, shall all be ours." But Lobo struck Skoll, and Skoll did yelp. "What do I care for all that, you whelp? What do I care for this stink of a rotten empire, which in any case I would throw in a judgment fire? Why should I soil myself with such thoughts to think? Why should a werewolf with political schemes stink? Never mind the consequences, never mind my fate. Why should I let my fury unwillingly abate? Blow whatever wind, blow whatever rack, I shall die with my pride upon my back." Having said this, Lobo then turned towards his foe, and Maidun struck one last time with his bruised and weary fists, which Lobo countered as easily as one walks through mists. The werewolf caught the man in a hold. Maidun then did scream, as Lobo with his great strength, as in a nightmarish dream, stuck his claws in the man's eyes, and then pulled at Maidun's head, till the man's neck started tearing, all bloody and red. Lobo pulled till from the body the head he tore, and so Maidun died, the ground covered with his gore. Maidune's wounded, battered men looked on in horror, as before them unfolded this awful terror. Lobo cast upon them his eye and said, "Now the rest of you shall die." And the wolves fell forward, and the men tried their best. But it was clear that the wolves were winning the contest, and as they bravely fought against these odds, some of them sent a prayer to the gods. Lobo was watching the fray happily, noting his imminent victory, when he pricked his wolfish ears. Did he hear a song? Suddenly a figure whirled through the battle throng. The figure was dressed in black with a furious attack. Wolf upon wolf backed away from his sword. Lobo watched his troops slink away, overawed. What a warrior! Maidune's men looked on in wonder as this amazing man fought like a blast of thunder. And just like that the men were saved, as the wolves backwards were flayed. And just then, but of course, into the fray came the horse, a furious, fearless, black-sheened mare, who fought as if without a care. Her red eyes were fiercely flashing as hoof upon wolf down came crashing. Skoll stepped forward, and he said angrily, "I know not where you're from, or who you be, but mere physical fighting skill does not scare me. Let's see if you can face me off magically." And Skoll summoned his will. Some words he did exclaim, and then his claws with a magic fire went aflame. The magic flickered with an eerie yellow light, sending menacing shapes dancing in the night. Our nameless hero simply smiled at his foe. He sheathed his magnificent sword and raised his fists. With magic will, his hands he suffused with blue mists. The blue mist wafted from his hands, dancing in the air as he took a martial stance, with just the right hint of flair. Skoll swallowed, suppressing his rising admiration. For this hero whose each move was an inspiration, he said, "Clearly you are a worthy enemy. Let's see how you fare in a battle with me." And then these mighty warriors clashed fist on fist, with Skoll's yellow flames against our hero's blue mist, and indeed it was a sight to see, the colors flashing constantly, to watch the night light up with blue and yellow, as mists and flame clashed between foe and foe. Though Skoll tried to tear our hero apart, our hero fought back with perfect martial art, and after 20 rounds of battle, Skoll was beginning to lose his mettle. And then Skoll suddenly found himself thwarted in his aims. The hero had grabbed his paws, and those mists then quenched his. Flames! Werewolf Skoll leapt back and stared at each now magicless hand, wondering who could so easily magic flame withstand. The hero, for special effect, flared his hands into blue dash. Skoll knew to continue would be a decision to rue. Skoll backed away, aware that he had lost the fight. He bowed a little to acknowledge the hero's might. Lobo howled, and then himself leapt forward, while yelling at Skoll for being a coward. Our glorious hero dispelled his mists, and reverted back to ordinary fists, And once again there was a fantastic martial contest, as Lobo tried to prove once for all that he was the best. Brute force met with manly strength, as the battle drew on in length. The raging werewolf threw down blow after blow, but was unable to overcome his foe. The nameless traveler, with a smile, fought with ease, his every move a display of great expertise, till at last it became time for him to end the fight, and he threw a right punch of most glorious might. All who watched were quite impressed. As he hit Lobo square on the chest, the force of the blow sent the wolf flying. Through the air backward he went, tumbling, coughing up blood through his wolfish nose. Lobo on wobbly feet then arose. A being of lesser strength would have died on the spot, as he tried to force his body to take a countershot. There was no hint of surrender in Lobo's eye, rather a rage that said either I kill or I die. But Skoll, who had his own secret plans to actualize, was not about to let his pawn meet a sudden demise. He quickly summoned his magical will for a spell, and a red fog suddenly came, as if straight from hell. As the fog faded, the wolves were all gone. The men looked in wonder thereupon. Skoll had the wolves away from there all teleported, and thus was Lobo's suicidal rage athwarted. A strange silence was there suddenly in the moonlit night. It was broken by the moans of those wounded in the fight, and the tears of the captains by the body of Maidune, as they mourned the claw's defeat of the sword with the rune. The hero walked among them, giving comfort where he could. With his magic healing, even the weakest then upstood. Dreadfully began the dawning twilight, to put an end to that terrible night. Maidune's men half-heartedly began to rally, for the capital was still some distance to sally. They, naturally, allowed the hero to take the lead, for of a leader they certainly now had a need. And whatever thoughts they had of any danger, of allowing themselves to be led by a stranger, were dispelled by our hero's amazing charm, which made all their various fears go gently calm. They gathered the fallen Maidune's body and head, and put it on a platform as a funeral bed. And those 4 of the least wounded soldiers carried Maidune. Upon their shoulders went the Lord of the Sword of the Rune. They marched towards the capital, our hero leading. All the time the men listened for distant howls, fearing. But our hero's amazing presence was more than enough of a defense, and no other dreadful event upon their journey made torment. Now before my story runs away from me, I should turn my story back to Zhenli. That self-same night that the Duke of Shangfu met his end, destiny a hero to our village did send. Little Lian snuck out from bed just after sunset, and under the starry sky this is who she met. He was wearing a tattered cloak of scarlet red. He gently strode with a soft and silent tread. His many adventures were etched on his face and bearing. Clearly he was a man who had learnt how to be daring. He had experienced many cultures and travelled far. He studied under Merli, Orion, and Shrinar, and had spent time apprenticed to Mephisto the cat, who'd enjoyed calling the vampire a glorified bat. Always mindful of his vengeful quest, he pursued our hero without rest. From Angleland, where Dundee's father had died, through Ital and Rumen and Slavia he hied, then south he went, into Afric, before sailing away, across the warm ocean, to Trivandrum and Alapai. Yet always, just before him, was our hero. Somehow he just never met with his chosen foe. For always some noble task would appear, which off his chosen course his quest would veer. Yet always Dundee would return to his pursuit. To keep chasing our hero he was resolute. And no thought had he of stopping in Zhenli, while pursuing the traveller so ardently. Lian ran and clutched at his cloak with her hands, and to him who had travelled through so many lands, this is what she then said: "I fear we shall soon be dead. Fearsome bandits stalk the country. We the next victims shall surely be. What can we farmers do if they invade? I beg of you, stranger, lend us your aid." Dundee wanted to say no, and through the village to go, to continue on his vengeful quest. That spurred him on and on without rest. But there was something in little Lian's eye, something in her soul that there did underlie an earnestness, a purity, which spoke to him in affinity. The door to Chief Lu's village home slowly creaked open, and Lu's attention suddenly became awoken by Dundee's silhouette in the doorway, dressed in glorious tattered scarlet array, little Lian holding the vampire's hand, with a trust that only a child could understand. This village was now protected by the hand of fate. On this, I think there is little need to further narrate. Back then, let's turn to the nameless traveller, our charming hero and fearsome battler, who led Maidune's shattered troop and brought home the ill-fated group. It was nightfall when they reached their destination, Peiping, glorious capital of the Shan nation. In the palace court under the stars and the moon's light, they placed the body of he who had fallen in the fight. They laid him down before the Empress Sigramu. Before she was told anything she already knew, she gently uncovered the body that lay dead, and stone-faced lifted up Maidune's severed head. She tenderly cradled the head in her arms, as if to protect it from all the world's harms, and carried it to the Shan throne, all the while her face like stone. She sat on the throne, everyone looking on in awe. The wolves understood, though the men knew not what they saw. The Empress sat on the throne with a dead man's head. Only a single tear crossed her expression like lead. And then she howled, she howled, she howled, she howled like a loon. She howled so that her howling could reach the very moon. She howled for the master of the sword of the rune. She howled for a lost lover, her lost lover, Maidune. And each werewolf felt her howls go into the heart, and then the palace wolves also began to take part. And as their mournful song echoed into Paping, the wolves in the city also the dirge began to sing. And so the capital, bathed in the moon's light, was filled with sad howling throughout that night. Sigrimyu then called for Maidun's sword. She held up the blade of Shangfu's lord, and she in pain cried out, "I swear, revenge!" Her soul burning for her lover to avenge, and she began to seek Lobo henceforth. But he and Skoll had long since fled north, where Lobo with the wolf tribes did liaise, thereby hoping his own army to raise. "As if it were my fault," said Lobo, "that I should now be the wolf queen's foe. Who forced her to take a human mate? Why should I have to suffer this fate? That I might live with my eyes to see mongrels to be born half wolf, half monkey. I'd rather die than live to see such aberration. Well cursed be the day we wolves spared the Shan nation." And about him he gathered a rag-tag force, whereby he hoped to change history's course. News of his rebellious gathering reached Sigrimyu's palace in Peiping, and the imperial army marched out, Sigrimyu hoping Lobo to rout. Both werewolves and men composed her army. She led it herself, her eyes all fiery. Our hero had impressed her, and he rode along, and during the march he comforted her with song. For there were times when her broken heart threatened to tear all her aims apart, and the provincial forces were summoned too. From the whole empire soldiers she drew, and as soldiers left the province of Kuan Yu, Warg, who was hiding there, decided this to do. Why should we bandits to the law conform, when our foes are marching into the storm? When war does the law distract, that is the time for us to act. Let us go forth, and what we want we shall take. Let terror and fear in the countryside awake. And after some discussion, it was Genli, that they decided their next target would be. Warg's gang was of both wolves and men composed. A more ragtag bunch could never be proposed. Scallywags, outlaws, ruffians, killers, rapists. Their tools were swords and claws, and sometimes blunted fists. Completely lacking in nobility, selfishness their only ability, they roamed the lands in a predatory manner, a rogue bandit force, under Werewolf Warg's banner. Dundee had managed to convince the village that the best way to defend themselves from pillage would be into a large nearby cave to retreat, for if he the enemy during the day must meet, then as a vampire he would want to avoid the sun. Better, he reckoned, that the fight in a dark cave be done. But back to Warg and his gang, armed with sword, claw, knife, and fang, they descended on Genli in the middle of the night, hoping thereby to pillage and rape with hardly a fight. They rushed in as a disorganized group, a motley, brutal bandit troop. But empty of people was the village. Hardly anything was there to pillage. Warg and his crew were bewildered. Such an oddity they had not considered. And then from behind an empty homestead came into the torchlight a figure in red. Dundee stepped forth with a heroic stride, his bearing full of courage and goodly pride. Under the starry sky one could see the vampire. To great and noble things this knight would aspire. An angry glance Warg then threw, and he said, "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Dundee Lasta, a vampire mage, and I ask you kindly to take elsewhere your rampage." And Warg's men laughed out loudly in abject derision. And Warg replied, "Before I make such a decision, allow me to clear up your confusion, for you seem to be under a delusion. I am Warg, werewolf king of robbery. The dreadful I am called in my infamy. I have killed and thieved throughout the empire. I laugh at laws and put villages to fire. I roam the lands and freely trod people under. It is my pleasure to watch other people suffer. And I have fought many a fool who thought he was strong, and always in the end I have proved that the fool was wrong. In all things, I have always considered myself first. All beings exist merely to serve my hunger and thirst. Now I tell you to bend down on your knee, and beg me to spare your life mercifully, for I as a wolf will not be scared of a bat. What are you, if nothing but a filthy winged rat? Your pathetic race is long past its time. Long lost is the whereabout form of your prime. You wretch, show me now that you know your place, and I may refrain from ripping off your face." Dundee replied, "Werewolf, I fear nothing will assuage. I asked you kindly, and you in return threats would wage. You are clearly not the type to negotiate, so I don't see why we should prattle and prate. Clearly you only wish to show your might, so I would suggest that you shut up and fight. Warg, who had never been much into reflection, to Dundee's challenge did not raise an objection. Without even a slight moment's pause, he leapt forward, baring his teeth and claws. Dundee had long ago forgotten how to be afraid. Calmly to the side he the clumsy attack did evade, and then with the wolf he did grapple, for which his strength was just about ample. They wrestled each other furiously, round after round, neither strong enough to throw the other onto the ground. Though nature's fury into Warg's body was fed, Dundee countered with the dread strength of the undead. Their mad grappling grew ever more and more fierce. Each was unable the other's defense to pierce. They threw each other into the walls of buildings, causing all sorts of random demolishings. Yet even with houses collapsing about them, neither fighter would his fighting spirit stem. Warg's gang watched in awe and in fear, and stepped backwards when the match drew near. But Warg was a supernatural brute, not a mage. Foolish he was a fight against Dundee to wage. For Dundee could always call on his magic will to pull through the worst of thin and thick and ill. Finally Dundee decided that it was time to win, and then he the helpless werewolf to the ground did pin. I would take your life, cried Dundee with enraged voice, but I was taught never in anger to make a choice. Now get your men out of here before I am moved to harm. I won't kill you, but I may be tempted to break your arm. And furthermore, I kindly request, my sire, that you from further banditry do retire, and trouble neither this nor any other village, and not take the fruits of other people's tillage. And Warg, who was exhausted and in pain, acceded to all that, and did not complain, and he left shuffling, his gang in train, and he swore never to steal again. As nearer they came back to their hideout, members of Warg's gang began to voice their doubt. Are we really going to end our ways? Will we have to work the rest of our days? Are we going to put away our claws and knives? Shall we settle down, farm the land, have kids, get some wives? And Warg howled, Like hell we do! As soon as I my strength renew, we shall burn to a cinder this village Genlee, and I will have my revenge on that bat Dundee. Now back my tale must turn to our hero, the nameless one with Sigrimu hunted her foe. And fierce with wrath grew General Lobo, and hiding from her he would no longer go. Skull tried to dissuade him, saying the chances were grim, that they were still too outnumbered, and that the war could be blundered. Skull suggested to first seed lies deceitfully, to try and split Sigrimu's force with treachery, but Lobo would not listen to such foxes' talk, preferring the mad plunge to the silent stalk. Skull, weary, began planning on how Lobo to kill. But yet Skull needed him for his charismatic will. For Skull was disliked even by those he richly hired, while Lobo was by many wolves freely admired, and the werewolf army they had so painfully built would without Lobo back to the forest go wilt. And so Lobo sent a message, in words cold and stiff. My queen, I challenge you to battle at Red Cliff. Sigrimu's 6 generals urged the empress to say no, for never should the choice of warfield be left to the foe. But Sigrimu's rage became hot and eager, and she would not wait to begin to beleaguer. Thus, the challenge she rashly accepted. Victory at Red Cliff would be attempted. Zhang Fei, Guan Yong, Zhao Yun, Caleb, Courtard, and Hemming. These were Sigrimu's generals, clever in war planning. The last 3 were wolves, the first 3 men of Shan. All were faithful and loyal, each wolf and man. Though they disagreed with the battlefield, yet not less fury would they in battle wield. And Lobo, too, had leaders of worth. Of courage these wolves did not have dearth. His lieutenant Skull, though disliked by many, could wage as furious a fight as any. And to that he had mastery of arcane art, that in the coming battle would play a part. To Lobo's banner had come quick. A clan led by a chief called Ulrich. Young Ulrich's father's life was saved by Lobo, in battles with the Shan, that now seemed long ago. Ulrich was now the chieftain of his clan. To repay Lobo's axe was always his plan. Ulrich and his clan's hearts were now set. to repay for Lobo their chieftain's debt. And then there was Randulph, a most charismatic wolf, who with his laughter and energy was for battle always ready, and he gathered those who for adventure yearned, a hardy band of werewolves who comfort spurned. Many others of lesser note flocked to Lobo's banner. A small army the general built up in this manner, but many more in the north ignored his call, and this was for Lobo the worst of all, for they said, Sigrimu is our rightful queen, that peace should reign old King Fenrir's will had been. You're a war hero, for that reason we won't intervene, but though we won't hinder, neither to treason we'll lean. Yet though these words cut into proud Lobo's heart, yet he was the type to finish what he did start, and so to Red Cliff he brought his little force, against the odds to fight his chosen course. Red Cliff towered over a treeless plain. It was the old edge of the werewolf domain. At its foot the two armies did gather, on a morn with clear sunny weather. Sigrimu kept the cliff face on her right, as her soldiers gathered in all their might. She led the center, along with Zhaoyun and Hemming. Courtard was the general who the right was leading. On the left were mounted men, under Guan Yung and Zhang Fei. Eager were these knights of Shan to ride into the fray. And Caleb had been sent with the archers to climb the cliff, so that with arrows from that height they could wreak some mischief. Our nameless traveler with Caleb asked to go, and Sigrimu for his request permission did bestow. Opposite them gathered Lobo's rebellion, with the cliff to his left his force he did station. Lobo took the center, to his left was young Ulrich, on his right Randulph, ready to plunge into fighting thick. Hemming, scanning the lines with his vision keen, mentioned, I note that Skoll is nowhere to be seen. I hope that he has fled our battle scene, for to fight magic I am never keen. Never mind the knave, roared Sigrimu. Let's make these bastards this day rue. Signal Caleb to let his arrows loose, that I may laugh as the foes reduce. And Zhaoyun ordered a trumpet blast. Echoing up the cliff the sound was cast. And along the crimson cliff edge sheer, the imperial archers did appear. And Caleb howled down into the plain, Rebels, now enjoy the feel of my reign. Then a cloud of arrows was fired towards the foes. And it was Ulrich's clan, to the cliff nearest, which with arrow wounds paid the price dearest. Lobo, seeing his allies fall, did up to the sky howling call, Skoll, stop them! Now is your time! Let not more pups die in their prime. For many in Ulrich's clan were young, for the first time into battle flung. Then the ground under Caleb's feet rumbled, and some of his men over the cliff tumbled. General Caleb cried, From where comes this shaking? It will not be long before this cliff goes down quaking. The nameless traveler appeared beside him, saying, General, the outlook appears grim. This cliff is about to collapse without a doubt. It is best for now a retreat to call out. While they flee, I will seek out the mage, that thus against us magic would wage. I wholeheartedly agree, Nameless One, with your surmise. And Caleb sounded the retreat, fearing a capsize. While the hero darted about the cliff's plateau, seeking out where, in which shadow, hid his foe. Skoll was not the type to eagerly hide, and out from behind a rock he did stride. I'm no coward, that so eagerly you must seek, but first allow me despair upon you to wreak. And he placed his claws upon the ground. And the earth shook with a horrible sound, and down came the cliffside crashing, into Sigrimu's troops smashing. The cliff rocks rained down thick and hard. Upon the right wing, led by Courtard, some of Caleb's men, tardy in retreat, also fell, their sad demise to meet. And beneath the debris that did tumble, wolves and men died buried by rubble, and confusion seemed down the ranks to spread. This falling cliff seemed to fill some hearts with dread. Lobo, sensing the change, pushed his center forward. He led the charge, crying, Strike at them! Onward! And though her right was in chaos, Sigrimu cried, Stand ready, for here comes the enemy tide. Like a wave, the rebels into her army crashed, and swords and claws then heroically clashed. But above on the cliff, Caleb did roar, Skoll, you wretch! Let your tricks be no more. Courtauld below was my dearest friend, and now perhaps he has met his end. Though I have no magic, I'll fight you still. For the sake of my friend, you I'll gladly kill. And before our nameless hero could intervene, Caleb had lunged at Skull, claws open, battle keen, and while the madness of war raged below, Caleb engaged for 3 rounds his foe. But though in battle skill Caleb had mastery, what good was this against arcane artistry? Skull tired of the physical fight, and calling upon his inner might, he grabbed Caleb tightly, and magic words he exclaimed. Into him surged his power, and Caleb burst aflame. And while Caleb screamed, Skull pushed him in the midriff. Caleb, then flailing, fell off the edge of the cliff, and so the general fell into Skull's web. Thus was the demise of brave wolf Caleb. Despite poor Caleb's fears, Courtauld in fact did survive, desperately rallying his men who were still alive. For now Ulrich and his clan, as per the battle plan, were surging against Sigrimew's right. If Courtauld's men there lost the fight, then Ulrich, outflanking Sigrimew, would bear down his might, and straight through Sigrimew's center his forces would smite. Guan and Zhang Fei, seeing how went the fray, wished in turn to outflank Lobo's center, except that Randolph played the interceptor, and then bravely did Randolph's band against the Shan cavalry stand, and furiously flushed red the face of Zhang Fei, and he cried, "You stinking wolf, get out of my way!" And Randolph laughed. Then the werewolf cried, "If hot talk is all you have, stand aside." Zhang Fei could not control his rising rage, and hastily the werewolf he did engage. Randolph in his strong werewolf form knocked down Zhang Fei's horse. Zhang Fei jumped off as if this was a matter of course, and swinging his spear, as he drew more near, he shouted his challenge to Randolph to engage in combat twixt man and wolf. Randolph and Zhang Fei for 5 rounds viciously fought, each eagerly victory over the other sought. But Randolph kept calm in his red-maned head, while Zhang Fei followed his fury instead. And as tends to happen, if one can keep cool, then your opponent will prove to be a fool. Zhang Fei was suddenly disarmed, and would have been greatly harmed, had he not been rescued by Guan Yung, when his fate in the balance hung. Guan Yung plucked him from defeat, and upon his horse beat a retreat, and so the Shan cavalry were beaten back. But Randolph decided not to press the attack, for he knew it was mostly luck, that the wolves had not been downstruck. He looked on his exhausted soldiers, panting. Many were wounded and barely standing, and Lobo's orders had been quite frank. Randolph's mission was to protect the flank. So Randolph ordered his lines according to a plan to try withstand yet another charge from the Shan. Thus was waging the brutal battle below, but above our hero faced Skull as a foe. The Nameless One spoke thus to the werewolf Skull. "I imagine that the great power you control could only have been awoken in the Oranai, under apprenticeship to the Witch King Mordecai. But I suspect from your actions and your manner that you are no longer strictly under his banner." To which Skull quietly replied, "Indeed it is as you described. But I for my ambition had to flee into exile, and I have not spoken to the king in a long while. If only he was less a hero and more a man, he could perhaps have dealt in a lesser master plan. How can I believe in his grand schemes, each crazy idea that from his heart beams? He believes that peace can come from force, that he alone can change the world's course. Perhaps the Witch King may achieve his lofty aims, if the demon god does not consume the world in flames. But if I ever manage to rule the Shan Empire, I will march into Oranai and put it to fire. And perhaps then, in my own way, I shall be hero and save the day, and save the whole world from its doom. That may come with the rise of Uzum. But you, I think I understand your game. Is not your death tied in with your name? You are marvelously great, but greater you could be. But tragedy, I sense, is part of your destiny. Why do you accept your fate? Do you wish the gods to placate? Why don't you join me in my ambitious quest? Together we can crush Mordecai in contest." To which our brave hero replied, "Skull, if my fate to yours was tied, the Shan Empire would never be yours. It would merely be devoured by wars, and unchallenged, the Witch King Mordecai would go on with his plans in the Oranai. Rather, it is you who I ask to join me, else your acts will only bring misery. To which Skoll angrily said, I would rather be dead. Although you think I am but full of vices, I feel that I've made too many sacrifices. I will not keep my ambition down, for I deserve upon my head a crown. Since it seems you wish to stand against me, let us settle this dispute now properly. Unlike the last time, you will find me more prepared. Let us fight, and let neither let the other be spared. So 2 warriors, both strong in magic will, did battle then, with all their amazing skill. So strong was their magic that they flew into the sky, and fought their battle as at each other they did fly. Lightning flashed, though there was nary a cloud. When blows were met there were thunderings loud. Flashes of light struck through the air. Intense colors struck all eyes with glare. And the hero and Skoll fought with such speed that one couldn't see how the duel did proceed. This great duel that above the armies did appear filled many a warrior's heart with utmost fear. For to be in a battle is already something grim, and the magic chaos above them made hope seem dim, for the unknown is able a hardened heart to stun, and both wolves and men began to break away and run. Both armies then had to rouse and rally their own, but the young hearts in Ulrich's army were fear-prone, and despite Ulrich's desperate commanding, Lobo's left wing dissolved, unwithstanding. Ulrich, unable to keep his clan from flight, made towards Lobo to rejoin the fight. Likewise, werewolf Kortad could not maintain Sigrimur's right, as fear injected itself into his troops like a blight. Hemming and Lobo then met on the field. Each demanded of the other to yield. Each instead of an answer threw a blow, and thus a duel was fought twixt foe and foe. Lobo was winning, but then Hemming did retreat. Zhao sword then did General Lobo meet. Zhao swordplay was of amazing skill. At one point he had the chance the wolf to kill, but, as his blade came down, Ulrich pushed Lobo aside. Ulrich received the killing blow, and Ulrich then died, and thus the son with honor repaid his father's debt. Life for life, as fair a price as any that could be set. Lobo, enraged at Pup Ulrich's death, lunged at Zhao with a curse on his breath. Zhao had by now lost his sword, and death was almost upon the lord, but in the end he managed to escape. Though grievous wounds on his body did gape, Skoll in his duel did his efforts intensify, and more violent became the flashing in the sky. Then there was a sudden blaze and burst. Then Skoll fell out the sky head first. The werewolf crashed to the ground in utter defeat. After all, who could ever our hero beat? The nameless traveler gently beside Skoll landed, and Skoll said, So, victory to you is now handed. And I can feel now my life ebbing away, with only my foe to hear what I say. Well, foeman, give me a little concession, and listen now to my dying confession. Should I curse the day, should I curse the hour, that was there when within woke my lust for power? I was nothing, until this inner drive made me for greatness suffer and strive. It was this hope that filled me with elation, this hope that one day I may rule my own nation. And yes, I would sacrifice many for my mere hope, yet does not all greatness with great dilemmas cope? I ask not forgiveness, for I lived as wisdom deems, better to die than to live forgetting your dreams. Skoll's body then gently faded like vapor, out of sight, for Skoll had drawn on his very life force in the fight, so desperate had he been to win, so desperate to not give in, that he used up all his life energy to try achieve final victory. So much for Skoll. Meanwhile the battle raged. The Shan cavalry once more Randolph engaged. Guan Yong hoping to break Lobo's right, and to change the course of the fight. And though Randolph and his werewolves fought courageously, his lines were at last broken by the Shan cavalry. The wolves did what they could to slow the tide, while Randolph rushed through to Lobo's side. General! Broken and shattered is your right wing. We must retreat before the Shan around us ring. I know you would rather die in battle, but that aside, there is no need to slaughter us all for the sake of pride. Let us retreat while we may, and live to fight another day. And Lobo saw no sense in letting more of his wolves die, when the chance of victory so clearly from them did fly. To continue the battle would have been suicide. So Lobo the call for retreat roaringly cried, and Sigrimue let him go, and did not order pursuit, for her own army seemed battered and irresolute. So she decided to first regroup and reorder, before pursuing Lobo across the border. Back into old werewolf country, Lobo did retreat. Once his army was safe, he and Randolph made time to meet. "Well, General," Randolph said, "shall we make a plan of how we are going to strike at the Shan? Weary am I of battle, weary am I of war, and I do not want good wolves to die any more. If good old Skoll were here, I'm sure he would have found a way to inspire me to carry on the war, come what may. But he is gone, and Ulrich went too early to his rest. Not counting you, I have lost those who reflected my best. Now Sigrimue, that wretch that consorts with stinking monkeys, is about to march her army into the wolf counties, which can only bring grief to my homeland. That is a thought that I cannot stand. This army fought well, and you, Randolph, fought superbly. Let us end this. Let this army now disbanded be, and I shall go myself, and alone face the Shan, that they may know wolf as more glorious than man." Randolph little understood Lobo's predilections. Randolph enjoyed both wolf and girl in his seductions. Randolph, with his handsome red hair, in both human and wolf forms was fair, and he was so interesting and charming, that everywhere he was girls deflowering. But he knew he would never change Lobo's racist view, so he bid the general a comradely adieu. For Randolph yet another adventure came to an end, and he with laughter and song sought some other quest attend. Lobo's beaten army then did dissipate, while Lobo marched back to his final fate. And so did the battle of Redcliffe turn out. Yet within you I am certain without a doubt is the aching curiosity to find out what happened at Genlee. Warg knew Dundee could not fight during the day, for sunshine kept all vampires at bay. For when the Werebat race chose undeath, this was their curse. They became vampires, to glorious sunshine averse. So Warg ordered his goons to attack at noon, sweeping down into Genlee like a typhoon. They then broke down each household door, searching to find anything in store. But as I have before mentioned, the people in a cave were stationed, so as much as they searched, they found nothing of note. Each household was empty of loot, of even a mote. Warg the Dreadful, his words bursting with ire, ordered the whole town to be put to fire, and his gang with torches set all aflame, and all of Genlee up into smoke became. But for Warg it was not enough, and he shouted out in a puff, "Where are the cowards that lived in Genlee? Where is that bastard, the vampire Dundee?" One of his gang, who had once lived nearby, answered thus to his werewolf leader's cry, "Up in the mountains is a group of caves. Perhaps there is where retreated these knaves. I know very well each and every hill. Let us search there for what we would gladly kill." Warg, eager to pursue this new avenue, ordered his gang up the mountain path, hoping to find the objects of his wrath. At a dark opening they gathered round. 'Twas the very first cave that they found. One of them walked in, blade ready, his eyes with a look fierce and beady. In the darkness of the cave he was instantly thrown back by a powerful blow from Dundee. As the poor fellow flew through the air, a look of pained confusion he did wear, Warg shouted, "The stinking bastards are in here! Get in, and with their blood these cave walls besmear!" One by one the bandits charged into the cave den, one by one the bandits were thrown out again. Deep in the cave huddled the villagers of Genlee, where they retreated when the smoke of burning they did see. And when Dundee they roused from his usual noontime sleep, he told them not to fear, he will the cave in safety keep. Near the cave's front he stood to stop the attack, and he easily beat Warg's bandits back. Warg himself then marched into the cave, and a furious fight for Dundee gave. Warg had a simple strategy to make sure he won. His battle plan was to drag Dundee into the sun. The werewolf kept trying to pull Dundee out, so Dundee had to keep withdrawing in this bout. And thus for many rounds the duel went to and fro. Their battle cries through cave and hill did echo, echo. Fierce was the desire for victory in both hearts. As they fought with all their skill in the martial arts, Warg fought with a fury that Dundee could barely match, and into the light did Warg almost Dundee snatch. Dundee knew he could not, until sunset, keep up the fight. At some point Warg, fighting with all a werewolf's raging might, would be able to drag Dundee soon into the light, and there beat him under the withering sun bright. So Dundee shouted, as they bouted, "Damn bandit wolf, run away while you still have a chance. I have no choice but to quickly end our little dance." To which in reply, the werewolf did cry, "Stinking bat boy, do not waste your breath. I will fight you to the very death." "As you will," our vampire then said, and all his magic into his fist he fed, and he sent a powerful blow straight into his werewolf foe. Warg the Dreadful fell backwards, and blood he coughed and spluttered. Dundee's punch had every organ within him ruptured. The bandit leader gurgled a final curse, then his life from his body did disperse. Warg's bandit gang, at the outcome of the brawl, decided to flee on seeing their leader fall. Since Dundee had barely enough of his strength left to stand, he was quite happy to be rid of the roguish band. And little Leanne came out the shadows to hold his hand, and Chief Lou declared Dundee a great hero of the land. But Dundee amidst the bustle fell promptly asleep, so tired he couldn't even his head upwards keep. Thus was the village of Genlee saved by the awesome Dundee. Now back to Lobo, let my story go. Alone he marched towards Sigramew's camp. The evening air flecked his fur with damp. He walked strong and tall, ready to play his part, though a slight stoop showed how heavy was his heart. It seemed to him that all he believed was now into shattered pieces cleaved. To him the world had become strange, altered by the cold winds of change, which cared nothing for what he had in thought, and made mockery for what he had fought. Yet all he could do in response was to fight. Lobo knew no other way to find respite, even though he knew his actions himself would send plunging madly into nothing but a bitter end. A patrol he encountered, 3 men he slew. One of the bodies into the army camp he threw. Thus the general, by this bold act of harm, announced himself to the army's alarm. Spearmen immediately surrounded Lobo, but so utterly fierce were the eyes of their foe that they were afraid to start fighting, and instead stood there, Lobo encircling. This circle of spears then moved through the camp, the spear tips glinting in the light of each lamp, following Lobo as he walked stoically through, as he sought an audience with the Empress Sigramew. And every now and down an archer sent from his bow into the middle of the circle a rough-aimed arrow, but though the arrow tips pierced Lobo's flesh, he walked oblivious to his wounds so fresh. He just kept walking with a distant look in his eye. What did it matter when he was ready to die? Sigramew by now had come this hubbub to see, and when she saw Lobo she cried indignantly, "You treasonous wretch, what fool's errand do you do now? My one hope is that you have come to grovel and kowtow." "Gladly would I grovel, my queen, and kowtow, if only you'd be willing to promise me a vow. If you only speak the words, then do with me as you will, and I'll allow myself to be killed or wrought any ill. In fact, to all injury would I be keen, if you would promise me one thing, my queen. Don't let men ever think themselves equals to us. Why should we werewolves allow them to think thus? If they are worthy, they would not be so weak, vulnerable to whatever whims we wolves would wreak. Above all, promise never again with a man to lie, for I cannot bear the thought of mongrels born thereby. Do not taint the purity of werewolf blood. Know your place. You're supposed to be the guardian of the werewolf race." Thus said Lobo, presenting the choice, in his speech with passionate voice. To which Sigramew, letting her rage out, replied to with a commanding shout, "I am the daughter of heaven, Empress of Shan. I am the rightful ruler and queen of wolf and man. How dare you speak in such a manner obscene? How dare you utter such things to your queen? You asked for a promise, but I'll give my vow. Lobo, you scum, I myself will kill you now." Then Sigramew shape-changed and did transform into her powerful and sleek werewolf form. Then she leapt straight at Lobo, and viciously engaged her foe. And they fought, round after round, raging blows between them did pound. Though Sigramew's troops wished to interfere, she kept yelling at them to not draw near. This was to be her duel, and her fight, her way of setting her pain within a right. It was a nasty fight full of claw and gore. Sweat dripped, blood splattered, and bits of flesh tore. Each inflicted quite a bit of harm. Then Lobo managed to break Sigrimew's arm. She fought on, despite that her arm was broken, as if all it did was more rage to have woken. Lobo was struggling too, but then a strong blow he threw, and the queen fell down, blood trickling from her crown. For a moment she wished to just lie there, to give up and give in to death and despair. Then suddenly she heard Maidune's voice. Get up, you still have the choice. I am always right beside you, dear. Why do you give in to your fear? She would never know if it was just the knock on her head, or if it really was a spirit that those words had said. But those words made her get up from her fall, to fight, broken arm and wounds and all, and she leapt straight at the throat of her foe, and with her teeth she ripped it out of Lobo. Lobo gurgled and struggled to breathe, his helpless fury did boiling seethe, as he clutched at what had formerly been his neck, but was now a useless bloody mess of a wreck. He sank in weakness to his knees, as his blood drained to the lees. The wound was mortal, so Lobo knew. He could fight no more against Sigrimew. Bring me the rune sword of the Dukes of Shangfu-Ti. Had I may this bastard with his victim's blade hew! At the Empress's order. The sword was brought to her. It was unsheathed. She took it with her uninjured arm. She brought it down and down in strokes of angry harm. As she struck, she yelled and howled and cried, and kept hewing long after Lobo had died. The nameless traveler stepped up to her and grabbed her hand, and said, Empress, the fight is over, as I understand. Your Majesty is victorious. You may sheathe your blade. Your enemy, rancorous, the final price has paid. Sigrimew saw how correct were the words of the hero. Only then did she realize that quite dead was Lobo, so she stepped back and dropped the sword. That had once belonged to Shangfu's lord. She spoke. I had thought that with Lobo dead, that some order would return to my head, that the pain that sits like ice in my heart would suddenly flit away and depart. Yet now he lies deceased, and Maidune does not return. I have avenged my loss, but yet my heart still does yearn. What was the point of all this blood and battle din, when what I want is to hear Maidune's gentle Gukin? I can summon armies and I can wreak utmost wrack, but what good an empire that cannot bring Maidune back? I have finally done it, my lover I did avenge. But only now I sense the meaninglessness of revenge, bitterness I still feel towards my mortal foe. Nothing is gained, and what is lost remains so. Though this may like a victory appear, the truth is that there are no victors here. The hero asked her to allow her wounds to be tended. To this the Empress Sigrimew finally consented. And the best physics used their skill in healing charm, to bind her wounds and to fix her broken arm. Lobo's body was chopped into several pieces, and then buried here and there according to caprices, that no one Lobo amata may there hark. Each site was kept secret, without a grave mark. For those few who thought Lobo a hero, there would be no grave site to visit and know. Back to Paping returned the Empress Sigrimew, and peace to the Shan Empire returned anew. Meanwhile, in the little village of Genli, well recovered from his bout was Dundee. He aided the villagers in rebuilding each home, though his heart urged in vengeful pursuit once more to roam. And with his aid, it was at a rather brisk pace, that the village was more or less back in place. Then the villagers of Genli began to grieve, for Dundee insisted 'twas time for him to leave. Not even little Lien could convince Dundee to stay longer as an honored guest of Genli, but just before he left they threw a celebration, and to return any time they gave invitation. So in the end, Dundee was really just passing through. Chief Lu, Lien, and the whole village bid him adieu. Thus began Dundee Laster's quest once more, to avenge his father's death so long before. Meanwhile, the object of his quest was receiving all the best. He received the Empress' honor at her court, for having at Red Cliff the victory brought. For without the hero, Skull's havoc would have had its way. In the end, it may have been Lobo carrying the day. She invited him to join her service permanently, to which our awesome hero declined politely. He explained that he had many adventures yet in store, with many great deeds to accomplish, and then some more. He had to travel to where he was needed most, and would now have to leave his most gracious host. The Empress Sigrimew bade him go well. Her generals their well wishes came to tell Hemming and Courtard, Zhao Yun, Zhang Fei, and Guan. Though they still knew not his name, his praises they sung. The nameless traveler then went on his way to some new land to venture to save the day. I do apologize if this tale seemed full of woe. Alas, this world full of joy is also filled with sorrow, yet I can confidently say that our hero saved the day. Thus, I've given you his adventures in the land of Shan, and how he had to foil Werewolf Skull's most villainous plan. End of Part 3. Ballad of the Nameless Traveler by Tomek Piorkowski, a fantasy epic in rhyme. Text copyright Tomek Piorkowski 2012.